Good afternoon, everyone. So I think it's a little bit after 1:30 here, so we should go ahead and get started and kick off today's event. Canada's productivity initiative focused on skills and immigration, labor markets more generally. So first, welcome. I'm Trevor. I'm the Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy, and we're thrilled to co-host this event with the Institute for Research on Public Policy, based here in Montreal. And this is the fifth installment of a series of events focused on a wide variety of topics, all aimed at putting some actionable, concrete policy ideas on the table to help move the needle on productivity, investment, and economic growth in Canada. It started about 1 year ago, almost 1 year to the day, actually, with a major summit in Calgary that explored a wide range of issues across several concurrent sessions. And then through this year, we've had in many different cities more focused day-long conversations or half-day-long conversations, on tax and competition policy, to international trade and interprovincial trade, to infrastructure, ports and rail, to agriculture and resources, and of course today on human capital, skills, and immigration. And I think it's a great opportunity in each of these events to bring together expertise from public policy leadership, either in government or in academia, to business and industry leaders as well, to really talk about practical solutions to addressing some of the challenges that have mounted in recent years and have become a little bit more acute, I think it's fair to say, this year in particular. And we'll see where things go from here. And so while I think most of the conversations in the panels and the keynote address to come will be focused on these practical, concrete policy ideas for governments at all levels to consider, I do want to set the stage, take a step back to really just define the current situation and the challenge that we face. And it will be fairly brief, but I think it's this context that is quite important so that we all have in mind what that challenge is and what the goal is that we hope to achieve. Now, of course, whatever the past few years have meant for investment and productivity and so on, and I will turn to that, 2025 has seen its share of sudden and significant shocks, not the least of which is dramatic changes in U.S. trade policy, our single largest trading partner by a very, very wide margin. Think back to early April and Liberation Day, where we saw tariffs that, if implemented, would have averaged well in excess of the highest rate of tariff observed in the 20th century in the United States during the Great Depression. They've come down since. Markets didn't respond too kindly to the early April announcement, and the U.S. did back away from some of the more significant tariff moves. But as of the beginning of this month, average tariffs in the United States on imports in force is 18%. Okay, so while shy of the 20th century peak, the delta between where they were at roughly 2% to the 18% that we observe now is a sharper change within a single year than at any other point in U.S. history. So it's a pretty big shock. Okay? It's a pretty big shock to the U.S. economy, but also to countries like Canada that export a considerable amount to the U.S. But a lot of our trade is exempt. The average tariff on trade between Canada and the U.S. is 3%, at least as of July. As an aside, we should have had updated data, but the U.S. is shut down currently, and so we don't quite have any more up-to-date data there. Which brings me to my second point that is perhaps larger economically for Canada, which is uncertainty. It did feel, and I hope it wasn't just me, but uncertainty felt like it was off the charts earlier this year, and measures back that up. If you look at one measure of uncertainty, it's quite a nice one done for about 24 countries that you can explore for yourself at policyuncertainty.com for a number of just incredible U.S. economists. Measure it for Canada, and you can see the spike in 2025 is many times higher than the worst point of the pandemic, which at that point was higher than any other shock that they had recorded, at least since the 1990s. We've come down since, but at least as of August, the latest data point that they've constructed, it's still on par with the worst point of the pandemic. So uncertainty is high, which means business investment will be low naturally, and hiring decisions might be postponed. So big labor market implications just from this alone. And there have been researchers that take this index and looks back on how it's associated with investment decisions and hiring. And a scale of uncertainty increase this large is historically associated with a full percentage point increase in the unemployment rate. Pretty big shock. So naturally, governments this year at all levels have been thinking very hard about how to move the needle on investment and growth and productivity to lean against some of these challenges that we're facing this year, but also to help fill a gap that has mounted over now several years. So typically GDP per capita in Canada and the US, or at least for the couple of decades until the most recent decade, moved together. Not perfectly, but largely, averaging nearly 1.5% per year growth over that span of time. But over the past decade, Canada's fallen behind in terms of real GDP per person, so the size of the economy per person, growing only about 2% in total over the past decade, opening up a significant gap between where the US went and where we went, on the order of about $600+ billion of foregone economic activity had we simply kept pace with that past pattern. Now, there's a lot of reasons why maybe the US is not a fair comparison. The amount of expansionary fiscal policy they have there is unsustainable and not something that we should try and replicate. But even if we look at other countries over that same span of time, relative to the OECD average, so the average of all advanced industrial economies, we've lagged by about a full 12 percentage points in terms of growth over that span of time. So there's a need to increase productivity because real GDP per capita is driven by changes in labor productivity, and inflation-adjusted hourly earnings of Canadians is driven by that. And so productivity matters for living standards. Now, there are moments in our past where we have grown significantly faster than the US and closed some of the gap. Where we are today is now about 70% of the US level, down from a little over 80% 10 years ago. That 70% level, as an aside, we haven't seen the gap between us and them this wide since the Second World War. But notice there are moments in our history where we have risen relative to the US. Some of those, especially the recent ones, relied on commodity prices. But the biggest period of convergence, where we went from about 2/3 the US level to over 80%, was prior to World War I. And there are some lessons learned there. And I should say there's a forthcoming paper, I don't know the timing, but soon, that we'll be releasing through the School of Public Policy from Vincent Galoso and Rispender. Sorry, I hope I didn't get... No, did I get that wrong? No? Okay, good. It's all right. Where they unpack that past moment of convergence and ask, what happened? Right? If you think back to your high school history classes, you think, the wheat boom and things like that. So commodities certainly played a part, but they argue, in fact, much more was contributed by business investment increases and infrastructure. Okay, certainly important areas that we're talking a lot about today, but also immigration policy at the time. And not just in terms of the large amount, so the scale of it, but the particular composition of immigration at the time, they argue, was a big driver of that convergence over a century ago. And so it remains an issue that might be relevant today. Now, that, along with many other reform options, does mean that if we think we can increase our productivity growth relative to the US by maybe a half a point, then we would converge back to that 80% level relative to the US by about 2050. So this is another point to take away, that the challenge is large and will take many years to address, multiple decades to converge back to where we were. Now, we've done that pace of growth relative to the US before. Okay, so I think it is a realistic goal, but we should be kind of honest with ourselves that it will require sustained effort over many, many years. And hopefully that's how we're thinking about the conversation today as well, that we're trying to persistently move the needle on growth, not just have short-term improvements in the level of economic activity. So I did note that there are a lot of options on the table, and the summit that we held in October was fairly large, so just some select photos from that, where a lot of ideas were put on the table. many of those ideas are what we've been exploring at events like this across the country. And today kind of bridges two of them, and I kind of think of them as related. It's about the supply of skill or the composition of the workforce, either produced domestically or sourced from abroad, if you will. I'm going to rank which ones are important, so in no particular order, but a lot to explore. And so that makes me very excited about the conversations today. And we do have, to kick us off, our panel will focus on skills and education. Then we'll have a break before then proceeding to keynote address. Yeah, I got that right. And then a second panel on labor markets and immigration policy. So great. I was hoping that would be that particular slide. So right on time, I think I will invite our first panel to the podium. Stairs are on my right, and I'm pleased to start with the research director of the Institute for Research on Public Policy, Ricardo Chejfec. He also is leading the Empowering Canada's Workforce program and also leads the IRPP Community Transformations Project, and that's aimed at supporting workers and communities through the low-carbon workforce transformation. So thank you very much, Ricardo. And our panelists. First, Jenna Lane. Recently, the Director of Skills, Innovation, and Productivity at the Canada West Foundation, retired from that role into Senior Fellow, and has for a long time and still remains a champion of developing a skilled and productive workforce able to fulfill the potential needs of Canada's economy. Second, Tricia Williams is the Director of Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center, where she leads a portfolio of applied research and innovation projects focused on building a more inclusive and adaptable workforce in Canada. And finally, but not least, Ruben Ford, the Research Director at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation in its Vancouver office. And the SRDC is a nonprofit research organization created specifically to develop, field test, and rigorously evaluate new programs. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it over to Ricardo. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thanks so much, Trevor. Thank you, everyone, for being here for this important conversation on skills and productivity. I have some questions for our panelists here, but I'm also going to turn to you probably with 15 to 20 minutes left. So please start thinking of your questions for the panelists. But anyway, next week we're going to find out more details about this government's first official budget. And we all know that there is a pretty huge national to-do list. We want to diversify trade, decarbonize our industry, lead in new fields like AI, and break out of stagnant growth. But to do that, we're not only going to need to be more productive, but we also have to confront the gap between those aspirations and our reality. Do we have the right people with the right skills in the right places to do all of this? As a lot of you might know, Canada does have one of the most well-educated workforces and populations in the world. But we also have a fairly high rate of graduate underemployment or overqualification among the OECD. Our post-pandemic recovery was marked by a widespread reporting of labor shortages, while at the same time, at least in some cases, industries and regions, we have skilled immigrants who struggle to get their credentials recognized. We have massive ambitions, but our productivity has stagnated, like Trevor mentioned, growing at half the speed of the US for the past 25 years, roughly. This disconnect, I think, between our potential and our economy's needs, I think is likely to be a major handbrake on national progress, and also the purpose of today's conversation. How do we start to fix this? How do we realign our systems of education and training with the urgent needs of our labor market? And how do we test, prove, and scale what actually works? To explore these critical questions, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. Janet Lane, former Director of Skills, Innovation and Productivity at the Canada West Foundation, Dr. Tricia Williams, Director of Research Evaluation and Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center, and Dr. Ruben Ford, Research Director at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. So to get us started, I want to ask each of you to just spend a couple minutes introducing yourself and your work, and to give us a bit of context as to where you're approaching this conversation from. Tricia, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I didn't want to use the fancy mic anyways. It's a little intimidating. Feel like a broadcaster. Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I was at the summit in Calgary, and I can confirm it was a great discussion. So I'm really glad to see that you're convening these regional discussions too, Trevor, focused on different issues. So congratulations to you, and thank you so much. So as you already mentioned, I'm from the Future Skills Center. And for those of you who don't know about us, we were founded, 7 years ago through an investment from the federal government with a specific mandate to prepare Canada for the future of work. So even though I try not to lose sleep too much that we haven't fixed that problem or put a big check mark behind that issue, I do think we've made some progress towards understanding some of the issues facing Canada. We've done that through a whole series of research and innovation pilots across the country to identify some of the root causes and issues, and identify some of the way solutions that we can bring to some of the challenges and skills. So I'm excited to talk about some of those today. I mean, I think to start, I would point out that, I think it was helpful, Trevor, that you started us out by kind of landscaping the productivity challenge. And we did some research that Future Skills published last year with the Conference Board of Canada that estimated that the productivity gap, the difference between Canada and the U.S., has cost us $4.49 billion, or 1.8% of GDP over the past 20 years. Right? So that's a significant chunk of change. And the skills mismatch alone in 2024 is estimated at $2.6 billion. So it's having some impact on our GDP. But it's not the whole productivity challenge. So when we, broke it down and tried to estimate how much of this gap in productivity between Canada and the U.S. is due to skills, we could estimate about 7%. So it's not the whole ball of wax. It's not everything, but skills is an important component of it. I think one of the things I'm excited to talk about today on this panel and with this afternoon is some of the things that we've been able to say now after, the money that's been put into the skills and research innovation pilots through Future Skills Center, is we have a more clear idea of what is needed to address some of these issues. So I'm not going to give that away right now, but just to say we're starting to have a point of view on some of the things that would be catalytic in the coming years.
Hello? Hello? I believe it's on reply. Hello? Well, thank you so much, Tricia. Yeah, we'll get back to those notes. Let me just pass it on to Jet.
Okay. Thank you, Trevor, for inviting me, and thanks for being part of this panel and for people coming to hear about it. I've been working on the issue of skills literacy and other foundational skills for 25 years. And on the move from competencies or to competencies from credentials for about a decade. And recently I was involved in a project that we called the Productivity Project that brought both of those pieces together with colleagues that I have been working with for years, which was a joy. And what we have found is that, yes, indeed, the skills mismatch is an issue. There's a mismatch of skills in educational attainment. There are 5 unemployed people with degrees in this country for every job that requires a degree and is available. At least that was at the end of the first quarter. So this is a massive waste. So we have to do something differently. And I would say that it's not about
the technical skills, although that is part of it. It's not as much of an issue as it is about the foundational skills. But there's also a mismatch in field of study, right? So we have to fix not just the educational attainment mismatch and the field of study mismatch, but this is what's dear to my heart, is the idea of the foundational skills. It's costing us, as people have said, a fortune. And I think, we learned years ago that a 1% rise in literacy, that's a 5-point difference on a 500-point scale. But you'd need to raise the whole workforce by that 1%. But that could raise productivity by 5%. And you think, well, everybody can read. But it's not about being able to decode. It's about being able to use what you have read in new and difficult circumstances. It's about problem solving, basically. And we find that a lot of our programs are teaching content, but not necessarily how to use that content and to solve problems, which is what employers are looking for. So Canada needs to do a better job of building the competencies that people need, understanding what those competencies are, putting them into competency frameworks. Employers are going to have to be a lot more involved in the training and deployment of their workforces. Because I think the skills gap, and you're going to hear different pieces today about what the amount is and what the depth of the problem is. But a recent or forthcoming OECD paper sort of says that if we eliminate the foundational skill differences, we could go about halfway to solving our productivity gap.
Thank you so much, Janet. I'm excited to come back to foundational skills in a minute. Ruben?
Thank you. Yes, I'm from an organization called Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. We're a non-profit research organization that has the mission to it's a twin mission, to try to help policymakers and practitioners identify what works to improve well-being for people in Canada, with a special focus on the disadvantaged, and also to improve the quality of evidence we use in assessing programs and policies. And we tend to do this through the development and testing of new program approaches. We have been around for 34 years. We have carried out about 550 projects in that time across federal, provincial, municipal funders, also for-profit, non-profit organizations, and with foundations. We're headquartered in Ottawa, but we have staff across the country, around 50, and I'm based in our Vancouver office. We are a kind of specialist in the demonstration project, where we do work to identify places where there are knowledge gaps in what we need to do next, and to try to build the most appropriate programming to alleviate those problems, and to test it out rigorously at scale in the community at the usually often the ground level. And I think that's going to be a perspective that I'm bringing to this. Is we have in those projects partnered, we act as a kind of bridge between governments, academia, employers, practitioners, educators, and participants. And we know what it takes to actually put a program in place. We put them in place ourselves, and we have a lot of understanding for what it takes to do research in a project without necessarily the research standing in the way of those operations of the program. And so we've had the privilege of working with many, many different partners in the past 3 decades, trying to find out what works to problems that are fundamental to the well-being of the people we're interacting with. And we get a lot of cooperation for developing new assessments, new training programs, new ways of thinking about outcomes by understanding the situation those projects face. I could give you an example of one of those, but maybe I should
I think I'll ask you about an example in a minute. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think if things are changing very rapidly and in almost all fields and almost all issues for Canadian public policy, but specifically in this one, right? So getting a sense of how can we try new things and see what works and in which circumstances, I think it's very valuable. So thank you so much, all three of you. Thank you for being here as well. And my first question is going to be up for grabs for anyone who wants to grab it. At the beginning, I talked about a contradiction, right? The potential, the way that Canada's workforce is highly educated, or worldwide recognition in various research fields, with the rates of underemployment or skills mismatches and labor shortages and or lagging productivity. I'm wondering if any of you from your organization's unique vantage point could tell me what do you see as the single biggest reasons? Obviously, there's not one, but what do you think is one of the biggest reasons for that discrepancy?
None. You can't say it's up for grabs and I'm going to have something to say. Of course. So I got on a plane this morning. So, in a nutshell, I think it's really interesting that you said, Janet, it's about problem solving, because I think fundamentally how Canada has diagnosed the problem of workforce in recent years has been as a supply challenge. We basically said we don't have the right supply. We need to train, right? So we've invested a lot of money in training. We pumped people through training. And I think we've misdiagnosed the problem, right? So I think at a nutshell, and what we're suffering from really is disconnected systems. There's lots of talk about skills challenges in post-secondary and education circles. I get invited to those conferences. People are talking about it. They're also talking about it in the employers, in amongst the private sector. And what we have is disconnected systems. So I think whereas we've diagnosed it as fundamentally a supply challenge, I think we need to invest more in bringing those different system actors together. And I do have ideas about how to do that, but not yet. I'm not going to tell you yet. I'll let other people weigh in.
Does anyone else have any suggestions as to what could be behind it?
I'm going to add, I think if I had to put, from our perspective, a finger on it, I would say it's a combination of skills gaps and skills mismatch, notwithstanding that we may be investing in the wrong training or we may be putting too much into training. But it's actually that the gap is something at the intersection between the needs of employers and the skills of the people that they can work with. We have a system of credential-focused knowledge-based education, which does not necessarily equip young people with the skills that they need to navigate the world of work that they're going to face. And we don't equip them with the tools that they need to be able to find themselves in that world of work, to find an optimum place for themselves, and certainly not the pathway that they need to follow educationally from where they are to their future employment. And that is a challenge which leads to skills mismatch and skills gaps. I think we have done quite a lot of work in this area, which has shown that the solution lies in bringing together the information that we have about the skills gaps that individuals face, what their shortfalls are on particularly foundational skills. If you're going to talk about the types of skills, I agree with Janet very much that it's in the areas of foundational skills, but with the needs of employers, with actual detailed examination of the needs of the performance in each particular role, and understanding where those mismatches are, designing curricula around those is where the solutions to improving productivity lie.
And can I just add that I don't think employers themselves fully understand what it is that they need. I don't think we've done a good job of helping them to get down into the weeds around what it is that makes their best employee their best employee. What is it that Joe does that makes him so damn good and so productive And how do I replicate that in my workforce? What are those competencies and how do I get those built before I do my hiring? And so we've had post-secondaries and other training providers say, this is what we're going to teach. We think this is going to work for you. Just buy our product. And it's not been working.
Those are really good points. I guess that what comes to mind is that a firm might know that they need a software developer, for example, but they might not know what makes a particularly effective software developer for their team. Is that more or less what you mean? And I think that's a really interesting point, because at the end of the day, you cannot get a degree on foundational skills, right? Like you don't go and you don't major in reading, in problem solving. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more.
School education.
But even you don't come out of high school with a certificate that says, I agreed with you that it probably should happen earlier. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you don't get accredited on these foundational skills, even though we're seeing they play a really big part of it. What do you think we can start doing a better job of teaching them? And are there different models? Like, do we need a different model outside of the one we're using? Or can it be done through the existing education system?
First, but I know you've got way more to say than I do, but I think that it's not necessarily what we teach, it's how we teach and how we assess that is going to make the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably do want to think about how we identify those skills and micro-credentialing or some level of assessment of those skills as part of the high school graduation program could make a lot of sense. I mean, I tend to think of this, as we've been shown, as a long-term problem we have to solve, and we have to go deep down in the education system at every stage, from early learning all the way through elementary, secondary, transitions to post-secondary and beyond, to look at each step of the pathway and what we can do to ensure that the skills are there to take best advantage of even the learning opportunities. So their foundational skills are a precursor to being able to learn other skills. And if you don't have those early on, you're not going to acquire the other skills later in school. So I think it's a necessary part of the process to focus much more on skills, maybe much more than we do currently on knowledge, to assess how we're making progress with our competencies through the education system.
That's useful, but I'd love to push for a little bit more specificity from all of you. Like I know that we've talked a lot about new frameworks like open learning or work integrated learning is another big one. I'm forgetting the role of competency-based assessments. Like, do these kind of more tangible new models that are coming up, do they play a big role in the foundational soft skills of the workforce, or can they?
Well, let's see. Okay, good. I think at the end of the day, it's like, I like to think of it as, you want to get your driver's license. Does that mean you have to go to driver's ed, or can you just go take the test and see if you can drive? Maybe you already know how to drive. Do you have to go through the training? Right? So we are so focused on inputs. We're so focused on training. Whereas there might be there's a shortcut, people. We can shortcut. We can just assess. Do you know the content? I think some things like work integrated learning, we know this is effective. We know it's the best way to learn. And I think you've seen some policy innovation from places like Alberta that says, every student needs an opportunity to have work integrated learning. I think it's great policy innovation. We're also seeing in Quebec, a 1% levy towards a skills training fund, right? Saying we need to invest in this. We've done research that's shown that, Canadian employers are underinvesting in skills. We saw the OECD comparisons up there. Another one is Canadian employers, private sector, $240 on average per year that they're spending on skills and training. OECD average is $750 and the US average is over $1,000. So the Canadian private sector is not investing enough in skills and training, right? We tend to expect people to pay for it themselves and government to pay for it. So I think there's a lot of things we can do better, but there's also some things we don't need to reinvent. Like, I got a proposal not too long ago that's like, we want to test if work integrated learning will yield better outcomes. I'm like, duh, we already know that. We don't need to test that again.
But it only works if there is intention in it, right? Like, it's not enough to say, oh, it's a work integrated learning program, if there's no intention around what you're going to learn, whether you're learning it or not, and then an assessment around whether you actually did learn. I mean, there's some data to show that not every work integrated learning is created equal, right?
And I think that's a good point. I'm a little shocked at the figure you provided. Do you know where that comes from? Like, why do we have that gap?
I didn't properly caveat, as any researcher should, that the data kind of sucks, right? The data's not very good. And we do need better data of it. But I mean, these are the things that, using all available data, it's on our website. We have a research report we published with Shift Insights that, canvassed the available data and looked at it. And unfortunately, there is a survey on business conditions that SESCAN was doing that they've discontinued. So, the data that was available is not going to be anymore. But I think it resonates. We do some public polling every year with Environics Institute. And we asked people this year, just in April, we said, how many of you done skills training in the last year? Or you've done some investment? And it was 43% of people. So less than half of respondents are saying we're actually doing some training. And then even fewer said that, they got any support from their employer to do it. So most people are paying for it themselves if they're doing it at all.
How do we change that? I wonder if any of you have any ideas as to what can governments do to encourage private industry to invest more in training, which sounds like a core need.
I mean, from our perspective, we would want to try to see an evidence-based solution, one which convinces people with credible findings. And we've been doing that kind of work for 15 years, I think. It's a hard job, providing those kind of hard figures, but we have done it with the first example is a rigorous experiment we did back 10 years ago now. Finished in 2014, working with the accommodation hospitality sector. We were trying to find out whether literacy and essential skills made a difference to the job performance and ultimate well-being of employees in the sector, and also to the bottom line of their employers. And we randomly assigned 88 hotels, 1,500 workers, after having assessed the organizational job needs and the skills of their employees, to see what impact providing tailored literacy and essential skills training would have, with training that was customized to the needs of each individual site. And we offered 40 hours of free training, and we offered to pay for the wages of the people attending for 20 hours of those 40. And it was very, very well attended for the 20 hours. We did not get many employers actually agreeing to the release time, showing that reluctance even to take free training like was offered. But the impacts from that, even allowing for the fact that not everybody took up everything that was on offer, were very substantial in terms of the improved productivity of the workers, their own. They were making fewer mistakes. They were less likely to need supervisor intervention. The customers in the hotels were much more comfortable with the service that they were receiving. There were more. We documented this with a randomized trial. We knew the hotels that were getting more repeat visits, the ones that were selling more food and beverages, getting higher occupancy rates. The employers were seeing their business outcomes satisfied just through what was very, very specific small amount of literacy and essential skills training. So we were able to show a very large return on investment to employers from making this training available. Even though it came through the experiment, we actually did our ROI based on if the employer was paying for everything. Still a very large return. So we think that providing that kind of evidence, particularly in settings where there's some generalizability of the finding, kinds of jobs that these people were doing were quite diverse within those accommodation sector jobs, will ultimately convince people, if only we can get the word out as much as we could.
But Ruben, I was part of that experiment when, and in Alberta, the organization I was with at the time was part of that. And when we went back to the other half of the hotels, because 44 of them got the training and 44 of them didn't, we said, okay, your partners, down the street are making 27% return on investment on this experiment. How about you pay for yours and see this kind of investment yourselves? And they said no, because they didn't want to pay for it. And I think we have a problem with mediocrity in this country. And I think we need to have a little more excitement about making money in this country. I think that's one of the things that's driving productivity in the U.S. is that they do have a higher drive towards productivity because it makes them money. And that's not part of my prepared statements, but I think that's what it comes down to. We're okay, right? I would go to employers and during the boom times in Alberta and say, we can help you improve the quality of your staff. Oh, we're too busy for that, right? If I train them, they'll just leave. Well, if you don't train them and they stay, what do you get, right? But they're happy. They were happy to keep them with this at the state that they were in. So partly it's that we don't know what we need, and partly that it just rocks the boat a little too much.
I love that. I do like making money, Janet. So okay, great. No, in all seriousness, it's a great point. I think. Look, I think at a nutshell, I think I agree. It's ROI, right? We have to, so Canadian employers are not convinced that there's an ROI in investing in training, right? So I think we have to do better. We have to have better training, faster training. We've been experimenting a lot with remote training, where under what circumstances is training effective? Can we get that ROI? I also think part of the solution going forward is going to be more regionalized workforce planning, right? So you need to know very clearly, where are you moving from? What's point A and what's point B? Where are you moving to? Who are the people you have? What are the skills and capabilities you have in a region? Southern Ontario, we are going to have some auto sector workers who are going to be available. What are they going to be like? Let's map their skills. What are they going to be able to be good at, right? And what can we move them to? And I think that a lot of times we expect that the post-secondary sector will just do this, right? So we say, you guys go do employer engagement, right? You are supposed to be good, have all these work. And personally, I don't think post-secondary is that good at it. I know they try, and there's pockets of programs that are better at it than others, but I also think we shouldn't expect them to. And when we look at other countries, they invest in workforce intermediaries. They have these, what I call honest brokers. Before this, I was in international development. It's very common in market systems development to have an honest broker function. And we need to coordinate between labor supply and labor demand more effectively around regional priorities and issues. And I think I think if we did that and intentionally invested over the long term, as Trevor says, this is not going to be magically fixed in one election cycle. But if we invested with a long-term intention, I do think we could bring employers to the table, because I think we have to make the case.
I just want to add, I think we can also work with employees, workers, potential workers, young people approaching the labor market. I think there may be some appetite for making money among those people, with better labor market information, so that they understand what is possible, what the supply and demand for particular occupations, but also particular skills is within whichever region they're in. We don't have the kind of democratization of that information that would allow workers and students to really interrogate, as I said before, their potential future selves and say, is this going to be something that I'm going to be satisfied with? Is this something I'm going to be finding rewarding? And to form that kind of pressure that would potentially change what's on offer by way of the types of training that they would be wanting to undertake, types of education programs they want to follow, and even the employers they're prepared to work for.
Yeah, these are some really interesting points. I'm kind of can't stop thinking about this need of making the case, because if it is the case that a pretty secure, sizable return on investment was already seen with those kind of attitudes back then, I wonder what we can expect from the future of work, right? Like, if there was a minor level of uncertainty back then, we're dealing with massive amounts of uncertainty now. We don't really even know what skills will be in demand 10 years from now, 5 years from now, depending on how things like technological, like AI development continues to go. So that's just one point. Like, it sounds like this is something that we should be working on really hard on. But the second one is, how do we combine those two, right? Like, as we do start to make changes, recognizing that a lot of things are changing in front of us in ways that we are already a little behind on adapting on, and probably haven't even started to think about in the right way. How do we adapt our systems to be a little more forward-looking, a little more responsive or flexible or resilient?
I would answer. I was just going to answer the first one. I mean, the second one, I think we just have to work hard at it. But the first one, I think that's why we emphasize, as we had now been a partner in the launch of the Skills for Success the federal government had about 2 years ago. Obviously, these foundational skills include digital skills, include communication, collaboration, adaptability, creativity, and innovation. These kind of skills, if we were able to assess them well, teach them well, there are ways of doing it. We are not necessarily doing them yet. They will, I think, provide the foundation. I mean, effectively, adaptability is resilience. So it will be the connection to helping us navigate these great uncertainties. Nobody can predict what AI will be doing, what we will need people to be able to do in relation to AI in the future. But if they have those foundational skills, and it's going to impact the whole of society, so the whole society needs those skills, we will be in a better position. I can't forecast what the technical skill requirement will be, but I can forecast the need for the foundational skills.
So would it be accurate to say, in order to enhance our national resilience, we just need to make all individuals a little more resilient?
That's from our perspective, not just resilient, but the full range of social emotional skills, as well as literacy and numeracy, the full set of skills for success, called that for a reason.
Excellent.
I would also add that I think we've underemphasized social and emotional skills throughout all of the systems, right? Both the supply side, but as well as the demand side. Read any job ad. And I would say, I'm ballparking here, 75% of the description is like technical things. And then at the end, it's like, oh yeah, got to be able to talk to people, got to have good relationships. And I think most, employers don't even necessarily understand how to articulate that skill set, how to measure it, how to assess for it. We still are kind of relying, and now not even going to get into resume screening with AI. But one of the things we're piloting with one of our partners right now is, a custom LLM, large language model, that is looking at, so if you're an employer and you say, hey, I need somebody on my team, and you type in, and it's basically like, what are you going to have that person do? And you say, oh, I would need them to do this, and I need them to, organize some meetings, and I need them to know this and deal with this kind of fisheries system and things. And it'll spit out a potential job ad for you based on, or job description based on the kind of skills credential framework for that sector. Right? So helping employers articulate what are the skills I actually need this person to have. So there's all this focus on the job seeker. You need training. You need to fix this. You need to do that. And I think we also have to help employers understand what are the skills that are going to help somebody be effective in addition to the technical ones. Because I completely agree with you, Ruben. Like, the half-life of technical skills is relatively short, notwithstanding that I do want my doctor to go to medical school and learn a whole bunch of technical skills. But they're going to have to keep learning them because medicine and research is going to change, right? So we need to do both of those things. It's not either or.
And I'll bring that back to literacy, because all those foundational skills, everything from adaptability which is basically being able to solve problems, and communication and collaboration. All of that hinges on literacy. Literacy is the capacity to go beyond just decoding, but to understand and use the information you have read in new and different ways, in new contexts. And I just can't stress that enough. It's the learning to learn skill. If you don't have enough adequate levels of literacy, you're not going to adapt well into a situation. You're not going to be able to learn your way out of the problem. And we are all experiencing that with the uncertainty that Trevor highlighted. How do you learn your way out of that problem? A lot of people in this country don't have the skills to do that. They're just sort of closing their eyes and hoping it doesn't happen to them. And so how do we teach literacy? How do we improve literacy? I'm saying it can be done by embedding it in every other content that is provided. If you want it to be, right? It's going to take an intentional way of teaching and assessing and making sure that people are reading. AI is fabulous, but it's going to make us dumber if we don't use it properly and actually ask the learners to use the information in a new way rather than just regurgitating the information that has been fed to them through whatever method, including AI. So, and then here's the kicker. We have now 4 major international assessments of literacy skill in this country, and we are not improving individuals' literacy skills. In fact, if you've been in the workforce for a while and you're over the age of 35, you're probably losing literacy skill in the job that you're in today. Because, and this goes back, dare I say it, to my feelings around mediocrity, we are in a low-skill, low-wage environment for the vast majority of the population. Like, maybe not the vast majority, but a good percentage of the population. There is all kinds of fabulous things happening at the top end, but there are a bunch of people in jobs that do not demand that they think. Mm-hmm. And that's causing huge productivity gap for us.
Thought-provoking, for sure. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's a good title for a paper there between artificial intelligence and the need jobs
getting dumber.
For you to think, yeah.
We're getting dumber.
Or intelligence is getting more artificial. But you make some really interesting points there. AI and automation in general, right? Like, we use the term very broadly, but it's the end. What we're worried about is that artificial intelligence is the next flavor or the next shape of automation is going to certainly have an impact, but it's also it also presents a number of opportunities. Like you described, there's we can use LLMs or various AI-powered tools to find better applicants. We were talking earlier among some of us about better ways of measuring competency and progress. I think that there's a lot of potential there that we hadn't really talked about. I want to ask one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the group. So if you do have questions, start getting them ready. I do want to kind of end with some possible recommendations or solutions, right? But there's a lot of players in this space, and we don't have a lot of time, even though I'd love to talk to you all day. So I want to ask each of you to just pick one: the federal government, provincial or regional governments, educational institutions, or industry and employers, and tell me what you think is the biggest or most important action they could take in the short term to try to start steering us back into course. Yes, you are.
For me, the pointy end of productivity is the problems that we're facing is with industry and employers. I would target them with resources, which is going to bring in the other players, but still to help navigate the nature of this problem with better information about skills so that they can better construct their job ads, but also better assess the skills needs that they have, and potentially also understand, the importance of keeping their workforce up to speed and providing tailored training. That happens within the larger organizations, but maybe not so much within the smaller ones. And there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada, which I think will need a lot of support to navigate the kinds of challenges we've been talking about with improving productivity through improved skills. So if you're asking me to pick one, I would go there, but I'm not saying that's the only part of the solution.
There are so many things. I guess I'd say one of the things I think I've noticed after like working on this in Canada for 5 years is that we're very reactionary and not very proactive in thinking ahead. We're treating this like checkers, not chess. And so I'd like us to play a little more chess. And I'd say that, most of our systems were designed for like the era of the 1950s. So we mentioned LMI, labor market information. The only way to get publicly funded career guidance is to lose your job. If you're thinking, hey, my job might end in a couple years, there's no, you can go buy it or you can do it yourself. So with that being said, my specific advice is that I think right now we're about to hear next week about a number of really big investments, right? There's going to be some big checks written. And I would say we have to start thinking about the workforce we need to get those things happening now, right? So a couple years ago, there's Canada Greener Homes, everyone get a heat pump in your house. And oh my goodness, we have no technicians, qualified to install heat pumps. Wish somebody had thought about that, So that is about coordination. So I would love to see regional workforce coordination, the connective tissue between labor supply and labor demand, rather than big announcements about how many thousand people we're going to train, right? I'd rather have us be focused on defining the outcomes we want rather than what are the inputs we're putting into it.
There's some really good long-term solutions, right? We've talked about the need for a high school graduate to be better equipped to go into the workforce and, to understand how to problem solve. I didn't learn to think until I was in my 30s, so I know that this is something that is not new. We used to do a lot more of that sort of regurgitate, get the right answer, not think things through. But so we can do a better job at the education system, but that's provincial. We can do a better job in the post-secondary system, but that's going to mean talking to employers. And if the profs can't do that, if academic freedom gets in the way of what you teach, then they still need to hear from employers about what is needed. And maybe it's not what they teach, it's how they teach and how they assess that needs to change. But it all comes back to me, from my perspective, to industry. They need to be hungry. They'll need to want to survive in this environment. And they'll need to start thinking seriously about what it is that what they need their people to do. And then we need to be really, really nimble. Because it's not about saying, well, another 4 years and I can have a program set up for you, and in another 4 years we'll have the grads. We don't have time for that. We're going to be left behind if we don't. So this is where all those new pieces, including micro-credentials, can really help. What is it that you know? What is it that you need to know? What is the gap? How do I fill it? How do I get credentialed for it? That's going to be the thing that we need to be really nimble about.
Great. I think we
We solved it.
I was just thinking that it's so just to take stock for those taking notes, we need to make a better case to small businesses and just the industry in general. We need to improve proactive thinking and coordination, and we need industry to also want to be ambitious, to want to have it and to be brought into the table. There you go. But actually, if people have any, and I'm guessing people have questions, please. I'm not sure, Trevor, how we're handling it. Is there a mic? Oh, great. So, perfect.
Well, I mean, it's a great point. We haven't touched enough on equity, I think, probably. And I would say gender, yes. I mean, women are actually overrepresented amongst, post-secondary graduates. And I think it's something we should be concerned about. Like, we need men to do well too, right? We need everyone to see a future for themselves. But I think as Ruben said, we have to be thinking about who's on the margins. And, one of the things, for instance, we found very clearly through Future Skills Center's work, and, the majority of our projects have focused on the needs of equity-deserving groups. And we have found very clearly that it's not enough to say, here's a free training program. That is not enough. You're not going to get someone in the door. And, somebody might have childcare, they might have all sorts of things that they need, what we call wraparound support and around that. That costs a lot of money, but we actually, tested a program that is that very effectively got people off social assistance in New Brunswick through comprehensive package of supports and saved the province of New Brunswick money. So there is a way to do this that is win-win for social outcomes and economic outcomes. And now we're scaling that pilot through British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, right? Effective public policy. So I think we know that there's differentials, but we also know that we can close them. I think we have some evidence of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we didn't cover today, and it's impossible really in the time. The projects that we have at SRDC are focused often on the appropriate tactics, the appropriate programming for many, many different groups. We've been working on a large number of programs that are trying to find the best ways to encourage women to consider a career in the trades, where there's a huge shortfall of women. And similarly, we're doing that with 2S LGBTQ community to find what needs to change to make these environments, these work environments, supportive and productive places for a broad range of people, Canadians. And we do the same thing again with people from Indigenous communities. It's a broad thrust of the work that we do. We haven't commented on it. We've been talking at a relatively high level about skills and education, but I think it's fundamental to the work that we do to find the solutions that work for everybody involved. And yes, we can identify gender angle on all of the stages through the education pathway. One of our projects is around why are there so few men in ECE, and then what do we do to attract more men to work in early learning and care? And what would that say to young people about their potential careers? Yeah, it's a really good point. Thanks for raising it.
And we should pull a plug on funding on ones that aren't effective. That's the unstated part.
Thank you so much. Do we have another? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for... Hello? I was so excited to use this microphone. Thank you so much for a really... thank you. Anyway, thank you so much for a very interesting panel. I guess, one of the elephant in the room that we talked a little bit about is federalism. So these are amazing ideas and projects, but they will be implemented in a very kind of complex multi-level system in Canada. So what are your thoughts about that, and what would be the proper way to maybe reimagine as well the federal and provincial relation when it comes to the future of skills in education? Thank you.
I mean, Future Skills Center has quite a bit of experience in this area, right? I wasn't there at the first days. Maybe some of you in the room were, but I don't think it went over very well when the federal government said we're going to put a lot of money in skills and education. I think what we found to be really effective has been doing the hard work of dialogue with every single province and territory. We've told them we're there to support them. I would hope that the federal government can do the same. Be like, this is about partnership, not about, we don't have time for elbows up and pushing each other out of the way. Like, we just don't have time for that stuff. We've also, we've tried to create some spaces. Like, we every few months we get the policymakers of the province and territories together to talk policy solutions. We call it a Skills and Employment Policy Forum. They want to share ideas with each other, and they don't really have a venue to do that. I think the Forum of Labor Market Ministers is kind of resuscitating now a little bit. So maybe that will again become a space to do that. But I think, maybe this is an opportunity in this moment of national crisis of, to try to bring down some of those internal barriers. And I would hope that I'm a little bit of a purist in that I think the solutions can always come best from the ground up. And I talked about regional workforce approaches. I think that makes a lot of sense. But we also, right now, I think that there's 3 pilots that I know of on, talent management pipelines, which is like a big buzzy new thing, right? And there's 3 pilots of them have Newfoundland, Calgary, Vancouver. I mean, we should be sharing lessons learned across those 3 places, and we don't want them to be siloed. So I think there's room for both, but I'm probably too optimistic. So.
Thank you so much for very interesting panel discussion. You touched on so many different things that I wanted to raise my hand almost in in a classroom. One of the things you mentioned was about a skills mismatch, and you mentioned that there are a lot of graduates that are completing their programs and then not landing their first job. And that's not just happening from the undergraduate students, it's happening with graduates, with undergrad and graduate, it's happening at all levels. And one of the things that doesn't seem to get enough attention is the great programs that we have in co-ops that, will teach students some soft skills and how to apply what they're learning in the classroom already and also manage their tuitions that way, right? So feels as though there aren't enough incentives for institutions to set up those programs. Institutions have been hammered in terms of, the costs that they face, staffing and whatnot, and yet not sufficient funding from provincial governments. So they've opened up, programs to international students. Now we're seeing that that's going to shrink. Institutions are going to be facing constraints. It's interesting. There's so many different complexities in that sector, and I feel like that is not getting enough attention. We're hearing a little bit in the media here and there as institutions are trying to raise awareness, but I feel like the students are not getting enough of a voice, and there isn't enough information for them to make informed decisions about where, what they should be studying, how they should be preparing, and how to prepare themselves in order to be successful in the labor market. I think that there are a lot of programs that we're having a hard time sunsetting. They're not necessarily, worth the costs that students are incurring to educate themselves in those fields, and then they're being disappointed. So who should be doing the research and outreach and coordinating that so that all of those different players are working in coordination so that they're more successful and ready? Because you've mentioned very astutely that we're being reactive and not proactive. On the other hand, I'm also thinking that, we're talking about, there are a lot of conversations about labor shortages and, people that are highly educated that are likely going to be losing their jobs as a result of AI. We'll be needing guardrails. We'll be needing people to sort of be monitoring what's happening because we've heard about hallucinations, using AI. I've seen that myself in doing certain co-pilot requests here and there to sort of fact check. And it's interesting. So if you can provide a little bit of insight there, I'd be grateful. Thanks.
Certainly not an expert on the post-secondary education system, but it seems to me from what I've heard that the biggest problem with co-op education outside of places like Waterloo that has built its whole, model that way is finding employers who are willing to take people. So if we're going to have more co-op education, we have to find the way to incentivize and show
employers what the value of that is to them. I mean, it's a way of test driving your future workforce, but not every business has the time to spend the time with that co-op student to ensure that the learning is happening. So it's an incentive that might require subsidizing another employee in the firm in some way. I mean, in an ideal world, the employers would be jumping at the chance, but that hasn't been happening. So, sometimes incentives do work, but we can't have more co-op places without more employers who are willing to hire. In an apprenticeship system, which is what this kind of is, then the employer gets some sort of subsidy in order to have that apprentice working for them. Maybe we need to be thinking of co-op education as an apprenticeship for the non-skilled trades.
But actually, before I think we have time for one more question after this. But I just want to follow up. We talked a lot about how we need better labor market information to inform both the industry about what they need and the education institutions about what to teach. Do you have any do you have any ideas about who should be informing the students?
So I kind of roll my eyes a little bit when everyone's like, we need better LMI. I mean, yes, of course we do. We need information. But I think the idea that you're going to present students with a list of like, here's the jobs and here's our imperfect predictions about what your future salary and job prospects are, and that they're going to make decisions on that. They're going to say, oh, no, my uncle was an engineer and he hated it, right? Like we actually tested this. We did some like behavioral insights testing where we tested like students who get labor market information, those who don't, and like it's not the only factor. Like we're not these perfectly rational beings that, go to X or Y based on the market information, as much as economists would love to think that everyone acts that way. I'm a sociologist. I know it's more complicated than that. So I think we have to have LMI, yes, but it's also about the guidance, right? So I like thinking more about what is the guidance that is going to be available. And yes, it absolutely needs to be part of the picture. And I think the very good question about the post-secondary landscape, and I would agree with Janet, I'm not an expert in these things. There are lots of people who are. But I think, again, mediocrity has been okay. I still get resumes from applicants who can list all the courses they took, but they can't say what they know how to do. They can't define their skills, and I'd say, there's no way that universities should be graduating students at this point who can't articulate their skills and what value they add to employers. And I'd like to see the post-secondary system do a bit better. Now I want them to have the resources to do that. Yeah, both and.
Great. We're over time, but I think we have chance for one last question. Great.
It should be.
Okay. I was going to ask a two-part question. I'm unsure now with the time if I should. Maybe I will try to make it really fast. So two-part. First, to Tricia, about the work integrated learning. You said that there were like these really big returns. I've read that literature really closely, and I really struggle to find any evidence of these returns. The problem is like the self-selection into co-op is really a hard nut to crack. But the other part of it, which is kind of more interesting to think about, is if we're going to leverage work integrated learning to increase productivity, maybe part of the return we see in the data is that if I have this co-op experience, I'm going to outcompete somebody without it. So it's like a competitive thing. But now if we're going to scale this up to the point that we all have work integrated learning, now that disappears at scale. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that. And then to Janet, very quickly, again, another margin is like these essential skills, essential literacy skills. I worked with that data a bit, and when I went at one point, I thought to myself, I've really got to look at what these questions are on these tests, the IELTS test, the PIAC test. They are so incredibly simple, these questions, that if a native English speaker cannot get a perfect score on these, I just shake my head. I mean, I encourage everyone to go look at these questions. And so then I said to myself, if we go into these data and we look at what the return, how are they related to wages among high education people, the return is exactly zero. There are no return to these literacy. So what it's capturing is some like really basic low, and it's mostly among people who English isn't or French is not their first language. It's immigrant communities where that variation is coming from. So I'm wondering there, are the productivity gains not mostly, we're talking about what's happening at the top end of the distribution and not these very low level. I'm wondering if there, how much productivity gain there really is from increasing these very low level skills in the population.
I will answer the second question just because I have evidence again from experiments. It's the lowest skill people who gain most from the training on essential skills. That's where we see the biggest performance improvements.
And we have data that shows, and I'd love to see, what you're reading, because we've got data that shows that the return is $61 a year per point of literacy above the average. So yes, if you have high levels of literacy, you are making more money. And I agree with you, the questions are simple, but 49% of the population is below level 3, which is the level of skill that is needed to function in today's jobs. So we have people who can't answer the questions, which boggles the mind, but there you have it. We're very fortunate, those people who sit in this room. But yes, there is data that shows that it pays dividends to have higher levels of literacy. And in fact, recent data is showing us that that's one of the reasons why we have more people with post-grad degrees now, is because they're the ones that are actually problem solving and using their literacy. Grads don't necessarily build those skills while they're in school. So post-grads are actually building skills, and that's what employers are looking for.
It's a bit of a matter of principle not to answer a question when somebody says they've read the literature closely, because that's scary, Mikal, but that's great. Look, in terms of work integrated learning, I think I was commenting on it more as a program design element. I trust you on the learning outcomes, that the evidence is unclear. I think we've had a lot of people try to tack it onto program design, and I'm just not convinced it's the best use of our kind of research dollars at this point.
We are actually trying to do 2 studies on the ROI of work integrated learning, and it's difficult to decide. But yeah.
So keep an eye out. And with that, thank you so much again to our panelists. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to keep hearing more about it.